Good morning and welcome to the AlabamaWorks webinar series, a monthly webinar designed to provide information and speakers related to the workforce in Alabama. Past webinars are available on the AlabamaWorks website at alabamaworks.com. And now your host, Nick Moore, Education Policy Advisor and Coordinator, Governor's Office of Education and Workforce Transformation.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the September 2021 AlabamaWorks monthly webinar. I'm standing in for Chairman Tim McCartney this morning, who is dealing with a personal matter this week. It's good to be with you today, particularly since we had to cancel the Q3 combined workforce meeting due to the uptick in the Delta variant. Some reports show that Alabama has the 11th largest labor shortage in the country. And so some of the work that we're going to be talking about today, particularly around non-degree credentials and competency-based education reforms, are the way of the future, and this adds newfound urgency and credibility to our efforts to develop an employer and learner center focused talent ecosystem. Today's program will highlight several partnerships and initiatives that are bringing us closer to that vision. Dr. Lori Williams, President and CEO of the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, or NC-SARA, will kick us off today with a focus on her work to make all forms of learning transferable and portable. Mr. John Bowman, Executive Director of Hope Inspired Ministries, will follow with a presentation of how Hope Inspired Ministries is integrating workforce training and supportive services to support folks with overcoming complex barriers to entering the workforce. Dr. Andre Perry, Senior Fellow for Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution, and his research team, Carl Romer and Anthony Barr, will join us today to discuss research they have conducted on the manufacturing sector in Mobile. At this time, I'd like to ask Dr. Williams to please take it away. Dr. Williams.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm sharing my screen, and if you could just give me a thumbs up to let me know that you can see it okay. Great. Thank you so much, Nick, and to everybody involved in putting this webinar together. I was teasing earlier saying with all the things that Nick wanted me to talk about, I'd have to talk like a person on a pharmaceutical ad with all the disclosures, speeding it up to about 20 times in order to get to it all. So for today, I'd like to share with you a little bit about NC-SARA, how it functions, and share a little bit of data about the state of Alabama and the way in which NC-SARA's data impacts Alabama in particular. I hope my presentation will help you all think about how online learning and distance education fits in, because I know Alabama is a very innovative state with respect to looking at the relationships between your college and university programs and your workforce development needs. So what I'll be sharing about today is divided into two sections: a little bit about SARA for those that aren't familiar with the organization and what it does, and some information about NC-SARA's data collection from the perspective of Alabama. In-state online enrollments, out-of-state online enrollments, and enrollments across state lines and programs that have some kind of a face-to-face component. So what is NC-SARA all about? You just heard Nick share what the name means, the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements. And I'm sure that there are some of you who are watching today with us who have been with your academic institution for more than 5 years. And you remember what it was like before Alabama joined NC-SARA in January 2016. It was costly, there was overwhelming bureaucracy, there was inconsistent data being reported, and a number of other areas that NC-SARA has improved with respect to online learning. We provide a streamlined reciprocity-based process for participating post-secondary institutions to get approval to offer interstate learning without having to go state by state, paying large fees, submitting data reports on annual calendars that all differ from each other from state to state, and having overwhelming bureaucracy. This slide here shares a little bit about our mission. We're all about trying to provide broader access to students who want different programs. We're also looking to increase the value and the quality of those distance education programs, making sure that there is student consumer protections. Here are some of the essential principles of SARA. First of all, it's voluntary. We don't recruit. States are our members and institutions choose to participate. And we don't reinvent the wheel. Accreditors play their part, as do state regulators and the federal government. We operate within that accountability triad. We provide a governance structure that includes the 4 higher education regional compacts, and we have a governing board as a private 501c3 organization. States approve the institutions within their home states to participate in SARA. The idea for SARA was started by a group a little over 10 years ago, and that included staff at the Department of Education, state higher education executive officers, state legislators, institution leaders, among others. We had a grant from the Lumina Foundation, and today the 4 regional higher education compacts joined a little bit later after this, and they now provide a framework for providing oversight. Here's a little bit about the enrollments in SARA institutions, which now number nearly 6 million. This represents total in and out of state exclusively distance education enrollments. We just completed an analysis of our 2020 data, and I did my best to update the percentages visually here, those percentages in the pie chart. Now public institutions enrollment makes up over 66% of all the enrollments of participating institutions in SARA. Private nonprofits, 23%, and private for-profits, a little over 11%, which went down from 16% just a year before. And you can see on the map of the United States how those 4 higher education regional compacts provide oversight of the SARA member states in their regions to make sure that institutions are adhering to SARA requirements as well as the states. And as you can see, Alabama is part of the Southern Regional Education Board. I talked a little bit before about those of you that might remember what it was like before SARA, and this slide shows a little bit more about that. There are many benefits for states, institutions, and most importantly, students, which I'll describe in a moment. So the cost was overwhelming. We have a game changer report about the cost being on average $11,000 for academic institutions. Under SARA, institutions pay between $2,000, $4,000, and $6,000 depending upon enrollment, which is a lot less expensive for institutions to be able to enroll students across state lines. An easier process, greater protections, streamlined regulations, more options for students, and again, inconsistent data. And I'll share a little bit more about data in a moment. So in addition to what I just shared about expanding access to students, there's now a better complaint resolution process, and costs are reduced that are often passed on to students. Outside of SARA, about half of the United States have no distance education regulation, and a third don't have accreditation requirements. All institutions that participate in SARA now are held to higher requirements for distance ed, must be accredited and in good standing. They must also demonstrate healthy finances with a federal financial composite score of 1.5 or above, and must provide an alternative to students when programs close, potentially even including return tuition. So I believe that our organization really raises the bar on consumer protections. Now that more than 90% of those academic institutions offering distance ed now participate in SARA. I want to mention something else here. Nick was talking earlier about competency-based and micro-credentials for students to be able to bone up on their workforce development skills, competencies, and knowledge. NC SARA covers all online learning activity, even that doesn't comprise courses that lead up to a program for which there's Title IV funding. All learning that happens under an academic institution's aegis and takes place across state lines is covered under SARA, including micro-credentials and competency-based education. And now I'll share a little bit more about Sarah's data. Collecting, reporting, analyzing data about interstate delivery of distance ed are all important parts of Sarah's work. Data collection and reporting helps measure the impact of Sarah. Within the enrollment report that we publish annually, and the new one's coming out very soon, the data helps us answer the question of which institutions are enrolling online students and where those students are located. For the out-of-state learning placement report, the data helps us to understand how many students are participating in out-of-state learning activities, like clinical placements for nurses or practice teaching, which are also covered under Sarah, and how those activities span program areas. So what about Alabama? As I said, Alabama joined Sarah back in January 2016 and is part of the SREB region, the Southern Regional Education Board. And here's some contact information for those of you that want to learn more about how an academic institution can participate in Sarah. You participate through your home state. And here's some information about Alabama's Sarah data. All of your Sarah participating institutions reported their enrollment data. And this is total in-state and out-of-state exclusively distance education enrollment. So the majority of your institutions that participate are public, no surprise, that matches the national data. Your total distance education enrollments in Alabama number over 96,000. The top states that send students to Alabama for distance education are Georgia, Florida, and Texas. And probably no surprise, the states that receive Alabama students include Arizona, Utah, and New Hampshire. If you think about those advertisements you see for distance education online, the top institutions for incoming students for distance ed in Alabama are Columbia Southern, Troy University, and the University of South Alabama. And here's this odd word that we call USLIP, that's out of state learning placement. It sounds like it's a word from a Nordic country or something. In 2020, our data report shows that there were over 261,000 out of state learning placements reported by institutions. And to me, this is a really valuable piece of information because this means that during a pandemic, we had overwhelming numbers of students doing their face-to-face work that went with their degree program across state lines. And the majority of those students were in clinical placements for healthcare programs, again, during a pandemic. So students were not afraid to go ahead and work on their degree programs, even if it meant putting themselves in harm's way. From Alabama institutions to clinical placements teaching other experiential learning in other states numbered over 6,000, and students coming to Alabama for institutions in other Sarah states numbered over 2,000. The top 3 categories for those face-to-face distance education placements were in health, education, and business. And if you'd like a sneak peek at high-level information that we've gleaned from our 2020 data, check it out on our website shown here. We also collected survey data from our participating institutions and found that institutions are likely to continue distance education post-pandemic. 85% moved courses to emergency remote learning in fall of 2020 because of the pandemic. And 59% told us that they plan to continue some or all of their emergency online learning to distance education after the pandemic, which is really substantial. There was an article in Inside Higher Ed last week about this very phenomenon. So despite the face-to-face students that are 18 to 23 years old, at traditional brick and mortar institutions complaining mightily about having to learn online instead of being face-to-face. They also want the flexibility that it provides, and they don't want to give it up altogether. And that's all I've got for you today. I would welcome any questions. The full data report with all of the raw data will be published in the next few weeks for those of you that are data geeks and want to get in there and play with it yourself. There's a whole lot more to glean about the ways in which I know you're looking at data that could be combined with our data to make really good decisions about which programs to offer to best meet the needs of Alabama's changing workforce, especially post-pandemic.
Thank you very much for that insightful presentation, Dr. Williams. We look forward to working with you to make sure that all learning counts in Alabama. This time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Bowman.
Thank you, sir. Let me share my screen. And can everybody see that?
We are not seeing it yet.
Not seeing it yet.
Now, there it is.
Okay. Well, I am from Hope Inspired Ministries, and you can see our logo down there is a fish, and that's kind of our motto: is we teach people how to fish. And the kind of point behind that is we teach people how to be self-sufficient. And I've been the executive director for close to 2 years now, but prior to that, I spent 26 years with the Montgomery Police Department. And that's actually how I was introduced to Hope Inspired Ministries. So, what it is, it's a workforce development with a heavy dose of social work. And we used to see a lot of the same customers coming through the jail over and over. And what that means is that, the individuals are broken. And until you reach in and try to fix whatever's broken in their life, then they'll continue to come through. So, I started out using it from the law enforcement perspective as a means to lower crime, because when we sent individuals to the program, not only would they not come back to jail, but they were out working, being a productive member of society. So I want to kind of share with you, because I know Nick mentioned, the problems in finding workers out there. And so I just want to share what we do as a means to help build the workforce. But I'll briefly share kind of who we are, a little bit about community relations, so that businesses can get involved, and also about growing our volunteer network. And this is one of our graduates that's actually working at Buffalo Rock and Birmingham in the HR department, but Rosa is her name. We do have a cap and gown graduation at the end that I'll talk about. But this is kind of our mission statement. Hope Inspired Ministries serves the chronically unemployed by preparing and equipping them to not only obtain employment, but maintain and also excel at employment. We just added that excel because the basic things that we teach, if they master them and do them really well, they will excel at employment. But you can kind of see the pathway of how Hope Inspired Ministries. Next year, we celebrate our 10-year anniversary, but we started in Montgomery in 2012, expanded to Birmingham in 2017. Last year, expanded into rural Alabama, into Lowndes County, which is the second highest unemployed county in the state. And we've had great success. The last class there was the largest amongst the 3 campuses. And then we partner with the Foundry, which is a year-long rehabilitation service in Bessemer. So we teach our curriculum to their clients in phase 3 of their program. And then this year we were excited to start with the Alabama Department of Youth Services. So we are behind the fence at the Mount Meigs campus, teaching the 18 to 21-year-olds their employment skills, so that when they get out, that they will be successful and not return to incarceration. So what is our curriculum? I tell people we don't teach welding. We don't teach, auto mechanic. We teach the basic skills that, when we talk to employers, that's what they tell us they're missing when they come. But we teach soft skills, employment skills, behavior management, character development, financial literacy, and then of course spiritual growth. But a lot of those things, to put them into work, it's just honesty, being honest on the employment with the employers, having a good work ethic. You see the financial literacy. A lot of times, people in poverty, when they get money, sometimes that can throw them back into maybe a past addiction or maybe a past lifestyle. We break down barriers when the individuals come to us. And a lot of times it's those barriers that prevent the person from succeeding. And those barriers can be homelessness, financial background, coming out of poverty, addictions. And that's where a lot of these things come into practice that they may not have gotten at home. The financial literacy piece, we help individuals find housing. We require them to have an address. So we partner with some of the, shelters. And I remember one of our students telling us about an individual at the Salvation Army that was not in our program. He should have been, but he played football for the Atlanta Falcons, but was now homeless. So it doesn't matter if you have $10 or $1 million. If you don't have the financial literacy background, then you can quickly squander that away. But we also provide documentation assistance. If you can imagine not having any form of identification, you wouldn't be able to get a job. You can walk into McDonald's and they're going to want some form of identification. We work with a lot of guys and girls coming out of incarceration. Matter of fact, one works for us, but she spent 25 years in the Alabama Department of Corrections facility at Tutwiler, came out of prison and received a little bit of cash and basically was told to go be successful. Well, she didn't have any form of identification, so she couldn't get a job. But she came to us, went through the program, did really well, and is now working for us. So we hired her. And then you can see the postgraduate support. Once they graduate our program, to actually graduate into our program, we have people come back to receive help, whether it's brushing up a resume, whether it's help doing online applications. We just had a young lady come back that graduated in 2014 to brush up her resume, and she's now working for the VA. But that's kind of our motto that we teach them is step one is to get a job, do it really well and be okay with a job. And then B, receive a better job, and then C, the career job. And that was a perfect example of that with her. We've just started, many of you know the Ready to Work program. And if you picture the previous slide on those soft skills, financial skills, those basic skills that we find individuals lacking, it's the same program that the Alabama Community College is teaching, the Ready to Work. So we are integrating those two so that when someone graduates Hope Inspired Ministries, that they'll get a diploma from us, but they'll also get a Ready to Work certificate and a Work Keys certificate, which for our students makes them more marketable as they go into a business. And this is, I talk about when individuals, we want them to be successful, but we have to look beyond the surface. And that's what I saw at the police department is there's an underlying issue oftentimes with the individual as to why they can't be successful. This is some of our data from our students, and 31% of our students have had a mental health diagnosis. And oftentimes those coming out of poverty, coming out of homelessness, are not being properly medicated. So because of their mental health issues, they're not able to be successful like you and I can. But if they get properly medicated, and receive those skills, then they can be as successful as you and I. 55% of our students have been incarcerated. 58% have a current or past addiction. And then 30% have not completed high school or GED program. And you can see Roger, this is a picture of Roger. He is a welder now, but he is an individual that came out of prison. He spent time for robbery, and he had troubles getting identification. We went with him, got his birth certificate first, then went to get his Alabama identification card because he couldn't get a driver's license. And the Alabama ID office told him he had to have a Social Security card before he could get an ID card. So we then took him to get a Social Security card. Social Security card said, you got to have Alabama ID card before you get a Social Security card. So, had it been left to himself, he would have probably went back to a past lifestyle because he couldn't get a job. But we were able to negotiate on his behalf. And now he has a Alabama ID card, then got a Social Security card, and now he has a job. So, and then just after I did this slide, he's since saved up enough money. He paid off his 2 tickets that was keeping him from getting a driver's license, and recently bought a car. So now he's driving to work instead of the bus. So it's a good success story. This is more data. 65% of our students are African-American, 32% are white. And then the male-female ratio is almost half and half, with a little more male than female. And you can see our age bracket. The biggest age area is 25 to 54, and that's those bottom 2 sections. And you can see up in the top, we do have students that are over 50. We tell students, as long as they're willing to work, we want to work with them. So that's the criteria for that. And this is the student in the back here is Jennifer. And kind of in back to my law enforcement days, in the early 90s, I rode a particular area in Montgomery, very high crime, and then went back probably 15 years later and was amazed to see that a lot of the same names is just a different generation, and it kind of goes into generational poverty, generational crime. And Jennifer is one of those where she had a rough childhood, and it relayed over to her children. But at 41, she found us on Facebook and has said, I want to change this lifestyle. So at 41, even though the same generational poverty had come to her family, she's turned it around and is now working in the nursing field in Birmingham as a CNA. And I know I'm out of time, but just to hit a few more points. And I've got Angela, she's our community relations director, on the line too. But we've really started trying to market more with the businesses. We have, and this picture here is some of the mock interviewers that come in. We have interviews with the students, but then we have real life businesses come in. So I would love to partner with any of you businesses that are trying to get employees to have you come in and do some mock interviewing. And that's some of the things that she does. These are some of our volunteer opportunities. We have mentors, and that's when I was at the police department, would come in and mentor with an individual, working one-on-one with them, and it kind of provided reinforcement. We have guest speakers to come in from the business community, really to come in and capitalize on what businesses are looking for. And then you can see some of the others: devotion leader, lunch provider every day. And it's kind of what keeps some of the students coming back, is we offer a hot meal, free meal. And it keeps them coming back for more while they get sharpened. And then that's some of our volunteer opportunities. But one of the things that I didn't cover, I want to cover, this is recruitment. So we have open orientation every Wednesday at 11, but students are not coming to us. So one of the things that we found is we have to go out to meet the students where they are. We do free food cookouts, and as students come up, talk to them about employment, find out if they're working. We partner with other nonprofits. This picture in the middle is we were giving out free food. This was in Lowndes County. On the break of, we would talk to them and say, hey, do you know anybody that needs a job? And probably 80% of the time, the individual would say, well, I need a job. So it gave us an opportunity, and you can see us going door to door there to recruit them. And then at the end of our program, we do a 3-week unpaid internship. So the students can go and practice the things they learned during the 6 weeks. And for the business, it's kind of they get to test drive the employee. But for our students, they get a fair shake regardless of their background, and they're able to prove themselves to the businesses. And then at the conclusion of the class, we have a cap and gown graduation, to where, most of the students have not had that wow moment in their life. So they're able to go into an auditorium with a cap and gown on, walk the aisle, to see a bunch of supporters standing up, in their corner. We don't have a guest speaker at graduation. The student is the guest speaker, and they give their story, their testimony, on how they're making a comeback. So here's my information. Please write down my email. That's my cell number, and then check us out on our webpage. But we aim to graduate about 60 students per campus each year, and that we have a high turnover rate. We typically start with around 40 students recruited, and then about 20 come to class on day one, and then we lose about half of those and graduate about 10 each class. We run 6 classes a year on each campus. So that's kind of who we are in a nutshell. I'd love to talk with any business or any other supporter out there. Please give me a call or email me. So Nick, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate that. Mr. Bowman did want to also highlight that Hope Inspired Ministries is one of our regional work-based learning Seal of Excellence winners and is in contention for the state level award. So best of luck to you in that competition. Clearly you are doing great work and helping many lives in the state. So now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Perry. The floor is now yours, sir.
Yes, thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much for having us. It's my pleasure. I'm going to essentially review our research. We released a report in July titled "Why Local Leaders in Mobile, Alabama Must Address Racial Equity in the Manufacturing Sector." If you can click to the next slide. Actually go to the next slide. I study Black majority cities and the assets within them, meaning the jobs, the employment, homes, businesses, and other things that if we invested in would lead to economic and social mobility. And one of the things that I re-emphasize that if we don't address racism, we will not change the numbers, some of which you are about to see. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is our research team. Because of a lack of time, we have an issue. I was heartened by the Alabama coal worker strike in Alabama recently. I'm actually lived in New Orleans for 14 years, and it was similar to what we are facing in southern Louisiana. Conditions on the ground, environmental conditions are changing, and we're simply telling workers, go back to school, go back to college, ignoring the on-the-ground realities, the culture, the types of workers that we have in states. You simply cannot tell blue-collar workers to learn how to code and advance an economy that way. And so what we plan to do here is to provide you with some of the data in the report that we showed, that we released earlier. And then I'm going to come back with some possible solutions moving forward. So I'm going to hand it off to Anthony at this time, and then he'll pass it off to Carl Romer.
Hi, everyone. So as Andre said, we looked at manufacturing, sorry, my slides are, as an industry that we wanted to center on because it's one of the leaders in the Mobile area as well as the state and offers some of the highest wages. I'm sorry, my slides are going automatically. So second largest industry in the region, and then also above average wages in the Mobile metro. And the kinds of jobs that are specific to this industry are middle skill jobs, a lot of them. So rather than kind of the entry level high school diploma, production line jobs. A lot of the kinds of industries that Mobile specializes in, steel production, robotics, biotech, the things like that require some level of post-secondary education. Now, we did cite a Georgetown report that looked at kind of nationwide data and said that, the bachelor degree jobs are highly specialized and insanely high wages. There aren't that many opportunities for those. And that's true in Mobile as well. It's actually that middle skill where you need some level of post-secondary, whether it's a 2-year degree, whether it's a certificate, an apprenticeship that takes you beyond just high school to give you some of those skills. And that's really kind of where we wanted to highlight the way that education plays out here. But as you can see in this slide, education does boost wages across many different industries in Mobile, but specifically manufacturing listed right here. And so that we do want to kind of emphasize that education is a pathway into better employment in this sector. That being said, there are all sorts of other things that our research found that are less exciting, and I will turn it over to Carl to talk about that.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Andre, for the introduction, and thank you to all the folks at AlabamaWorks. We really appreciate being here today. So on this slide, as Anthony was mentioning, we do see that although some industry categories have high wages overall, there is some discrepancy between the wages earned by workers with a degree and without a degree. Industries like educational services see quite large discrepancies. Workers with a college or trade school degree see their wages more than double over workers without any higher education. So then you compare that to something like the utility sector. And in that field, workers only see a $700 increase with a college or trade school degree. So workers are taking on an incredible risk in achieving the education for themselves. For some workers, like those in the educational service sector, those risks typically pay off relative to the education of workers who do not take on that risk. But for workers in the utility sector, they may be better off had they not taken the years out of the labor force necessary for the schooling. This is part of the reason that we have suggested that instead of continuing to shift the risk of education onto those workers, that employers need to take on some risk by offering apprenticeship programs. Next slide. So when race is considered along with education, the picture does get blurrier. Black workers in Mobile, like non-Black workers, do get a significant pay increase when they get a college or trade school degree or certificate. But the median non-Black worker, so white workers, Asian workers, et cetera, without any certificate or degree, still make more than the median Black worker with a college or trade school degree. This suggests that Black workers are undercompensated relative to their skill level. And this could partially be due to gender composition of the labor force. Women work less than men, and women make less than men. And Black women actually comprise a much larger sector of the labor force than do non-Black women. White women specifically work much less than Black women. And so we should also definitely be having the conversation about gender parity and gender compensation as well. Next slide. Another reason could be that Black workers work in sectors that pay less than non-Black workers. Here we see that Black workers actually make more than non-Black workers in the highest paid industries like mining, quarrying, oil and gas extraction, and in the military, and in one of the lower paid real estate and rental leasing industries. Next slide. However, if we look at where those, go back. No, other way. There we go. However, if we look at where the jobs are located, very few workers, less than 2.5% of workers are in these industries where the median Black worker makes more than the median non-Black worker. Next slide. So in the manufacturing sector, previous slide. Anthony, I think that your automatic, it's going automatically for you. If you go to the top and then press to turn that off, you can. So in the manufacturing sector, which we're here to talk about today, the median Black worker makes less than 60% of what the median non-Black worker makes. So as we saw, education can start to minimize some of those disparities, but a college or trade school degree does not bring workers out of the labor force, or it does bring workers out of the labor force for several months or years. And it puts all of the risks of education onto those workers, which is why apprenticeship programs can start to shift some of that risk from the employee to the employer. So offering the types of apprenticeship, paid internships, paid apprenticeship programs can really start to benefit Black workers. And Andre, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, I often say that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can solve. The reason why I say that when things go wrong in Black communities, we blame Black people. We try to fix Black people. And instead of addressing the racial disparities that exist, as Carl showed, that educating Black people is not enough. The wage discrimination, the employment discrimination, incarceration is driven by racism. We did not end up in the workforce in the manner in which we did by accident. We did not end up in jails and prisons by accident. And so if we're ever really going to change these numbers, we're going to have to invest in Black people in ways we have not before. Clearly, as was stated, we can't just deliver the same type of education as in the past, but we must deliver some form of education and eliminate the drags of racism if we're ever going to see the kind of economic growth in the state. So there's three things that, if you can go back, sorry about that. We have to invest in people, direct capital towards paid internships and apprenticeships on job training. We have to invest in K-12 STEM educating, including CTE and outside the classroom experiences. But because of discrimination, entire communities are lacking resources. So we must make targeted investments in place, including HBCUs. Remember, Alabama has more HBCUs than any other state, and HBCUs have showed great outcomes in of graduating and producing Black talent. So we need to invest there. We also need to partner with businesses and developers to link to workforce development, to climate resiliency and the green economy. Hey, the fossil fuels are dwindling. They're running out, and we must adapt. But the goal is not to say, let's just have those workers code. And finally, we must divest from racism, audit hiring and promotion policies to identify barriers. Those wage discrepancies are not by accident. We have the data, so do companies, so does the state, so do cities. We need to hold people accountable for those kind of wage disparities. We need to install anti-racist policies using transparent metrics for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and stop using bachelor's degrees to screen out candidates for jobs that don't require a degree. Next slide. There are some programs out there that we've identified in the report. If you could click on the next slide, please. Maybe, oh, there you go. Bishop State Community College is doing a great public-private partnership where they have the kind of degree programs that our previous presenters acknowledged. And so again, this is the kind of institution that we should be investing in long-term. Next slide. If we're going to continue to recruit industries to Mobile, we have to work together. Again, I used to hate this saying, if we could only fix the schools, everything will be all right. Knowing that housing, incarceration, transportation, and all these other things influence outcomes. We have got to look at a systemic approach to change. Fixing people won't get us the kind of equity we deserve. And by the way, in general, we study underappreciated assets, meaning if you add water, it will grow. You can close us out. If you add water, it will grow. Meaning that if we invest in the underappreciated assets of Black people and institutions, you'll see greater growth than you would by maintaining status quo or investing in the same institutions we have been in the past. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Perry, and to your team. It was a very insightful presentation, and thank you for digging into the data and giving us some insights into manufacturing in Mobile. Look forward to working with you and partnering with you in ways so we can continue looking at the data and seeing how we can extend opportunity for all Alabamians, with a particular focus on those who have been underrepresented for far too long. At this time, we will end our webinar for the day. We will be back on October the 18th at 9 a.m. and with a new lineup. So thanks again to all of our guests. We can now give them all a virtual round of applause. Until next time, please stay safe and tell everybody to get the shot. We've got to make sure we get all vaccinated so that way we can get back